Well, I want to start off, and generally we're going to focus on continuing our series that we've been in, but I just want to briefly talk a little bit about Father's Day and the important role that fathers play in our world. And honestly, dads, we don't get very big props or thank you very often in the culture we live in today. It's rather a goal of mine to always encourage dads on Father's Day because, really, what you hear so much in our society today is, dads, you're not doing good enough, right? There's always this criticism. And I would just say, ever try to do that on Mother's Day? You won't do it again, right? Mom, you're just not doing good enough. You would never say that to a mom, and I don't understand why we would ever say that to a dad, but we always do. And we always will point out where they've come short. And yet at the same time, I know not every dad's perfect. None of us are. I always think that listen, we have God the Father as a standard, right? And because He's the Father, He's the perfect Father, every single father is going to fall way short of that, and that is just the challenge we have. But listen, God is the perfect Father. So whether you have had a good father or not, I really want to encourage you to look to God as your Father because He is the one that's perfect. And so, but dads, let me just start with this. I want you to know that you're not a father by accident. It didn't happen by accident. God gave you this role. And we see a really cool psalm in Psalm 127, but look at verse 3. It says, children are a gift from the Lord. They are a reward from Him. And so dads, the first thing I want you to remember is this. Your kids are a precious gift from God. I mean, He has entrusted to you the life of your children. And I remember the weight I felt when Carrie and I were leaving the hospital with Levi, our firstborn. And I remember thinking as I'm walking out, what am I going to do now? How am I not going to break this? I mean, there's no one else to turn to help if I don't know what I'm doing. And how am I going to protect this gift? And that just weight, it was overwhelming. But I think it's good to remind ourselves from time to time that our kids have been given to us as a gift from God. It's an awesome responsibility when you realize that. And so our kids are also, though, a reward, but not just a participation award. I mean, that doesn't mean anything. It is a reward. Our kids are a special reward from God that we should cherish because only God could give us such a gift. The miracle of a baby, it still blows my mind. I mean, I don't know how anybody could look at new life sitting in front of you and hold that baby for the first time and not see the miracle of the hands of God over that. And if you can't see God and the miracle of Him in that, you're really missing out on a wonderful gift. On top of that, though, that miracle is the chance that you and I as parents get to see in helping our kids discover and use their gifts. I mean, stepping back and looking at my kids and who they are and how God made them to be, and then realizing that I play a part in helping them discover their gifts and talents to get to use them in this world that God put them here. I mean, it's just an awesome thing because I have two kids. They're way different from each other. If it's one thing having a second kid shows you, they don't all come out of the same box and they're the same. They're all individuals and there's differences in them, and it's a joy to see those things. Now listen, there's one more thing I want to emphasize of Psalm 127. It's a responsibility we have of this incredible gift. It says in verse 4, children born to a young man are like arrows in a warrior's hands. Listen, I love that the Bible describes the role of fathers as a warrior. Did you get that? As a warrior. Listen, as a dad, we are to be doing battle every day for our kids. We do battle every time we're teaching them something. We do battle every time we're training them. We do battle every time we go to battle for them in prayer over the things that they're going through in their lives. We do battle as we love them. We do battle even as we discipline them. Like, nobody likes that part, but we're doing battle. We're doing battle as we guide them. And our job is really, Dave got to do archery for the first time this week at camp. It was a highlight of something he was sharing with me. And the one thing that it says is what? We aim them, our children, like arrows at the target, and then we let them go to hit the target and hit the mark. And Dad, I really want you to understand that that is really our role of what we're doing. I don't know if we really have realized what that warrior's heart means that God has placed inside of us, but I encourage you this week, just take some time and ask God to show you different ways He's calling you to do battle over your kids. Ask Him to show you what you can do to help set them up so that they hit the target of their lives that God has created for them. And so our culture may not recognize the value of dads, but listen, God does. He does totally, and He has gifted you with this special gift and special role that you play in shaping your kids' life. And listen, your kids, you're the best dad ever for them. And you should want to be striving to do that. And so I want to encourage you today to be that warrior that God has called you to be for your kids. We're not going to really spend the whole message, like I said, on this, but I just want you to know there's a part you play that's vital, and to encourage you to just walk in that role and be encouraged today. Listen, we're going to get back into our series. We're in Mark chapter 8 today. We're looking at one of the biggest questions we all need to answer. And dads, you know this too. Your kids have a zillion questions they're asking you. Hey, Dad, what is this? What is this? What is this? And you're always answering their questions. But the question we're going to look at today is the most important question that we can ever answer, but it's also one of the most important questions we can get our kids and help them to answer with their own lives. So in chapter 8 of Mark, here's the whole passage we're going to look at. Then we're going to dig into what it means. Mark 8, 27 through 30. It's just a couple verses. But it says, Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went to the villages near Caesarea Philippi. As they were walking along, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" Well, they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say you are one of the other prophets." And then he asked them, "But who do you say I am?" And Peter replied, "You are the Messiah." But Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. And so let me give you a little context of what's going on here, because we are about halfway through the Gospel of Matthew. There's 16 chapters in Matthew. In Mark's Gospel, he is showing us who Jesus is. And when we get here, we're seeing this exchange that he's having with his disciples. But listen, Mark had started off his Gospel very clear on what his purpose is. We read this in Mark 1, verse 1, the very opening of the book. It says, "This is the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. He makes that declaration right out of the gate of this book. And he's saying, this is who Jesus is. But then, like a very good author, he goes on to give you evidence to show you who Jesus is, that what he's saying about Jesus is true. And so he spent these last 7 chapters walking through the miracles, the teachings, and the life of Jesus that backs up that claim. And so at the halfway point through this book, we now revisit the main question that the author's really trying to get us to explore. Who is Jesus? Who is he? And why does it matter? And while it is the halfway point of this gospel, you need to understand that the disciples at this point have spent over 2 years with Jesus and following Jesus. And when they started following Jesus, they didn't really know what they were getting into, right? They just knew just enough. They were hoping that Jesus was who he claimed to be, that he was the Messiah, but they weren't too certain yet. And I've seen so many times this happen in people's lives today. They're just not sure who Jesus is, but listen, they're starting to hang around Jesus. They start coming to church. They're not sure what they believe, but they're looking to see if he really is who he claims to be. And if that's you today, I just want you to say, you're in a good place. This is the part of the journey where you're exploring who Jesus is, and Jesus has given you the evidence to show you who he is. And we're all in that exploration, really. I mean, no matter where you're at in your spiritual journey, you're trying to discover more of who Jesus is and to understand him in a greater way. That's really why this series is so important, what it's all about, following Jesus to know him more, to come to see him for who he really is. But at some point, Jesus is going to ask you a question to process the things that you've been seeing. This is what he's doing to his disciples. And so we read this again, verse 27 through 28. This is the part we're going to dig into. Jesus said to his disciples, as they left Galilee, went to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. As they were walking along, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" Well, they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others, you are one of the prophets." I love it. Jesus starts off, what do other people say that I am? Who are they saying? And let's be honest. It's easier to talk about God through the eyes of other people than to talk about him personally. Whenever I'm leading youth group, I'll tell you what, I can get kids to talk openly about God as long as it's not personal. And when I ask them a direct personal question, I just get eyes staring back at me. But if I ask a general question, well, what do other people say? They're willing to talk about it. And sometimes we want to make God personal too soon. And people aren't ready for it. And that is why people get defensive, though, when we start telling them about Jesus. We're trying to make it personal, and they're still trying to figure out themselves. They're just not ready to get personal yet. And there is wisdom in having a spiritual conversations that help people process God without feeling threatened by their response. And so Jesus is doing this with his disciples. He's saying, hey, okay, let's start here. What is other people saying about me? Listen, Jesus, it's not like he didn't know. He didn't know what the answers were. That wasn't the problem. He wanted them to process it themselves. The answers are valuable because, listen, our culture helps our beliefs. You have to understand that. You don't come to your beliefs without going through the culture you're in. And they're there, and that means we have to address the questions that our culture is asking about Jesus. And if we don't do that, we will not have an honest understanding of who Jesus is in our lives, and we will struggle. And so let's talk through their list, then walk through a few on our list in our culture today. The first is, on their list was who? John the Baptist, right? He must be John the Baptist. And if you know the story a little bit about Jesus, there was a king named Herod who ended up throwing a party, and his wife's daughter danced and made him happy. And so he's like, hey, I'll give you whatever you want in the kingdom. And she goes, hey, give me John the Baptist's head on a platter. What a gross request. But his head gets chopped off in prison. And so the king is thinking, oh, well, Jesus might be John the Baptist. I mean, you thought zombies are new, but it's not, apparently. It was back in the day. And so we read this, though, in Matthew 14, 1-2. When Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, heard about Jesus, he said to his disciples, or his advisors, this must be John the Baptist raised from the dead, and this is why he can do miracles. Now, quite frankly, I find this a strange connection here. And the reason I find it a strange connection is because Jesus and John the Baptist hung out together. And so how could Jesus be, him raised from the dead when they were already hanging out together in real life? But listen, it was a rumor that was going on. It was common in that day that Jesus was John the Baptist. Now, the second one on the list has a little bit better possibility, and it is the man Elijah, the prophet Elijah. And the reason why he is popular on this list, or more possible, is, remember, he never died. The Bible says he literally went to heaven in a chariot of fire. God took him away. Plus, there is prophecy about Elijah in the book of Malachi that says Elijah would come before the day of the Lord came, or the Messiah came. And so one day, the disciples are actually asking Jesus about this prophecy. And again, we turn to Matthew, in Matthew 17, verse 10-13. It says, his disciples asked him, why do the teachers of the religious law insist that Elijah must return before the Messiah comes? Jesus replied, Elijah is indeed coming first to get everything ready. But I tell you, Elijah's already come, but he wasn't recognized, and they chose to abuse him. In the same way, they will also make the Son of Man suffer. And then the disciples realize he's talking about who? John the Baptist. So Jesus makes very clear this prophecy about Elijah actually was fulfilled in John the Baptist. And so when we come to the final answer they gave, which was more vague. Well, maybe Jesus is just one of the prophets. He's just like one of the prophets. You understand, the prophets of God were set apart by God to speak on behalf of God. So God had anointed certain people to be prophets who were able to speak the words of God, and their goal was really to point people back to God because they weren't following God. And they often had done miracles to back up that they were God's messengers. And so they were sent by God. And so Jesus, he's certainly doing this, right? He is a prophet. He is pointing people to God. He looks like the prophets of the past. But if you look at the list and you see these comparisons of Jesus, what you see is he's compared to some really great people. At least people who were highly respected. They weren't always listened to, but they were highly respected by at least many people. But is Jesus really just another person to add to that list? Or should he be on a completely list by himself? That's kind of where Jesus is going. But before we get there, let me talk about Jesus in our culture. If we were to ask people in our culture today, who is Jesus? We're going to find answers like this. People often say, Jesus was a great moral teacher who did some great things, and he loves everyone. That's who we would sum Jesus up as. Other religions, many religions, still acknowledge who Jesus is, but they just call him a great prophet. He wasn't the Son of God. Of course, there are people that deny Jesus ever existed and that he was just completely made up. I would just say this. If you believe that, listen, you need to really understand that the historicity of Jesus is proven outside of the Bible, that he existed and was a real person. And so if you believe this, you've not looked at history and you've not dug very deep into who Jesus is, and I'd encourage you to do that. But most people fall into this camp. They just don't know what to believe about Jesus. But the problem is they're okay with that. They just leave it there. They don't look any deeper to see is who Jesus claims to be worth finding. And what we find in our own culture is this general acknowledgement that Jesus was a good guy who did some good things, and we're not sure if he's real or not. And that's really what we see in our culture. So when Jesus, he comes to the disciples, he asks them the question. Again, he's not looking for a compliment. He's not looking for the answers. He's looking for them to process and to see that the culture doesn't go far enough in what it says Jesus is or who it says Jesus is. He obviously wasn't John the Baptist. He obviously is not Elijah or just a great prophet. He isn't even just a good moral teacher who loves everyone. He is bigger than all these things. But I'm going to tell you this, it's in wading through all of this, what the culture thinks about Jesus, that leads us to the important truth of who Jesus is. And so while most of the world is willing to flatter Jesus and just say he's this great guy, most people are not willing to acknowledge Jesus for who he says he is. That's because flattery allows us to use Jesus for our own purposes. But if we acknowledge Jesus for who he really is, then guess what? We have to submit to him. If he's really God, then I'm not, and I have to submit my life to him. And now listen, for the Jewish people in their day, the agenda they had for Jesus was the Messiah was coming to overthrow the Roman government because the government of Rome was oppressing the Jewish people. And that's what they were looking for and for the Messiah to do. And when Jesus doesn't do this, what do? They get rid of Jesus. They don't want anything to do with him. They let him go to the cross because he didn't fulfill their agenda. And we can be pointing fingers at them, but I want to say we're often guilty of the same thing. Even if you're a Christian already, so often we approach Jesus with our own agendas. Many of us are following Jesus because we hope he'll improve our lives. And as long as he's doing that, we'll keep following him. But if life gets hard, so many people stop following. Why? Well, because we're trying to follow a Jesus that's not the real Jesus, okay? He's not the real Jesus. In fact, many atheists hate God because he didn't do something that they had hoped for God to do. And so because he didn't do that, because he didn't fit their agenda, they turned themselves against God. I just want to acknowledge that normally those who have fallen into that camp, they really had something big they went through, that they were disappointed. But I can't even begin to answer the why of what you have gone through if that's the case for you today. But I can point you to this truth. God is the only one who can redeem the bad things that you've gone through. Amen. What you're running from is actually what you need. You need God to save you from the hurt and the pain that you've gone through. So Jesus, he starts with, okay, what's other people saying about me? Because part of, again, of our own understanding of that is as we wade through those things, we begin to come up with what we understand Jesus to be. And throughout our entire lives, we're going to face all kinds of voices. that are telling us their opinions about who Jesus is and the questions they have. And every time that happens, we're going to have questions. We're going to have to face those things. And this is one of the reasons why I reject the notion that people can follow God with a blind faith. Nobody follows God with a blind faith. You have to follow God processing what the culture is saying about Jesus and what your personal experience is about Jesus and how that has. And so real faith wades through all of those challenges and says yes to God in spite of it. Only when we're able to answer who Jesus is to us that we're able to say yes and surrender to God. And so this is why we deal with the question of what other people are saying first, before we get to the question of who do you say Jesus is. But we get there. In verse 29, it says, "But who do you say I am, Peter?" Or Peter replied, "You are the Messiah." And there's something important here that is really, as we dive into this question, that we grasp and we understand, and it's when it was asked. See, we started the series in the first chapter, and Jesus just is calling his disciples and says, "Hey, follow me." And back then, they didn't know much about Jesus, but they knew enough to say, okay, God, I'm going to significantly commit my life to you, because they still, to follow Jesus, it cost them a lot. And we talked about that early on. The fishermen gave up fishing. Levi gave up his tax collecting booth. And there's a significant commitment to seriously checking out Jesus, even though they didn't quite know where it was going to lead them. And when you and I begin to follow Jesus, there are significant things that we start to do to find out if Jesus is who he is. For some of us, it's just taking time to go to church. And you're taking the time to go to church, but you're investing that time into exploring who Jesus is. For some of you, it's reading your Bible. And as you read your Bible, again, you're investing time in discovering and seeking to know who Jesus is. For some of you, it's praying, or it's all of those things, right? And as you pray, you're beginning to hear the voice of God. And as we begin this journey, though, we have no idea where God is taking us. We're just kind of along for the ride, but we know enough to just keep following him. And that's what being a follower is like. And there's something that it becomes more than just seeing the miracles or hearing the teachings. These 2 years become this time that the disciples finally start to connect, to know Jesus personally. Not only to know him, but to love him. And one of the biggest differences between people who go to church for a while and then they leave, and really, they just walk away. And those who go to church and become true disciples is the people who leave have just learned enough about Jesus. But the second group of people have learned to know Jesus and to love him. That's what God is after. Those who enter a relationship with Jesus, they begin to understand what following him is actually about. And it alters our lives. It changes us. You know, when Carrie and I started dating, I appreciated her greatly. We had a lot of fun together. We'd go on dates. We'd spend time together. But listen, at the end of the day, she went back to her life and I went back to my life. And we had separate lives. And all of that changed when we got married. Because listen, now we spend time together, we enjoy each other, but we don't go our separate ways. We do life together. And this is the difference between growing in a relationship with God. It doesn't be like I just meet God at certain times and then go do my life. There has to be a shift in our lives where all of a sudden we're doing life together. Why? There's a commitment to God, and there's a connection in that relationship, and it has grown to that point. Listen, the disciples are finally starting to get it as they're following Jesus, that Jesus is altering their lives. And this is why Peter is able to answer on a personal level. And the beauty of it is, Jesus waits over 2 years before he presses the button and says, hey, define our relationship. Tell me who I really am to you. At some point, we have to answer the question for ourselves personally. Who is Jesus? Because it really doesn't matter what everyone else says Jesus is or who they say it is. What matters is, who do you say that Jesus is? And dads, you will answer, again, a zillion questions from your kids, but helping them answer this question should be one of the most important goals you have. I think the Bible gives us great insight into how we can help our kids answer this question. And It's not just to tell them the right answer. I wish it was that easy, right? But it really is not. It's actually to lead them to explore with their own lives what a relationship with God looks like and to model it before them. That's what we see in Deuteronomy 6. And it says this, "Listen, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength. You must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands that I'm giving you today." Notice it goes on to say, "Repeat them again and again to your children." Talk about them when you are at home and when you're on the road and when you are going to bed and when you're getting up. Tie them to your hands and wear them on your forehead as reminders and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And this is one of those really important commands that every single Jewish family knew was central to their lives. And notice there is talking about it. There's a verbal instruction, but the biggest part is not what you say, it's how you live. It's following God what your life is all about. Can your kids see that in every part of your life? I mean, like while you're at work. I mean, they might not see you at work, but even your reputation or at their games when they're playing sports, how you act there, or driving in your car. Do they see Jesus in you as you're driving? Or as you're watching what you're watching on TV? Or many other things. As they're looking and watching your life, can they see that there is a desire and a wholehearted devotion to God in everything we do? See, we always need to be making sure that how we're living is reflecting what we say. Words are easy, and our kids probably see through our words more than anybody else around us. They know who we really are, not just what we say we are. In Matthew's account, he tells us, though, why Peter is able to give the right answer. And it's simply this. Jesus replied, "You are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you, and you did not learn this from any human being." At the end of the day, listen, we come to know who Jesus is. Why? Because God reveals himself to us. God opens our eyes to the truth of who he is as we're following Jesus, and all of a sudden we see him. And this is the same way our kids will be able to see God and see who Jesus really is. And so one of the prayers that I pray for my kids, and I want to encourage you to pray for your kids, is God, open their eyes so that they can see you for who you really are. If it's true that only God can open our eyes, listen, you're not going to open their eyes. I'm not going to open their eyes, but God will. And so it should become a cornerstone prayer of ours. As we close, there's an important reason that Jesus is asking this question now. It has to do with where they're headed. In chapter 9, we find that they're headed up a mountain. And on that mountaintop, something really cool is going to take place. They're going to see Jesus changed and glowing right before him. They call it the transfiguration, glowing right before their very eyes, and literally heaven, the voice of heaven coming down, the voice of God saying, "This is my son, listen to him." I mean, think about what an amazing impact that would have. But I want you to understand something critical is here you see them declaring, "You are the Messiah." There's a revelation, there's an understanding. In a short period of time, they're going to see the transfiguration. They're going to hear God's voice. And what we see is that there is this constant, continuous revealing of who Jesus is that God does for us to confirm our faith and help us grow in our walk with God. In other words, we don't answer this question, who is Jesus, just once and then move on with our life. We answer this question over and over and over again. And our journey of following Jesus is going to require a consistent confession in our lives that Jesus, you're the Messiah. Jesus, you're the one who saves me. Jesus, you're the one I surrender all to. And that's because all along the journey, we're going to have to face the questions over and over, who is Jesus? Why? Because life is hard. And it's filled with many challenges, and we're never exempt from them. And when you go through those challenges, you're going to have questions. Who is God? Where's Jesus? How is he not part of this? Listen, as a pastor, I've had so many challenges throughout my whole life and had to answer this question many times. But I'll also say this, I am literally weekly walking side by side through people who are going through the challenges. They're believers. And so we walk through the surgeries and the hospital stays and sicknesses. We walk through deaths and funerals and learning to do life again without that loved one by our side. We walk with people through marriage problems. We walk with people through challenges they're having with their kids and kids with their parents and families who are just seeing their whole lives disrupted because their families are torn apart. We walk through with people who are dealing with bondages of addictions, of low self-esteem, of depression. We walk through financial trials and job losses and trying to find a place in this world for my life. You know how many times people are like, I don't know where I'm going to stand in this world. We walk through disappointments and broken hearts and losses we keep down deep inside that no one else will ever know. And the thing is following Jesus doesn't exempt us from any of those things. And when we go through them, we're faced with the question, who's Jesus now? Who's Jesus now? But those who are following Jesus have learned to confess, he's my Messiah. He's the Son of God. He is the one who saves me. See, it's our confession over and over. Who is Jesus in this moment? Who is Jesus as I'm going through this? That is really one of the most powerful things in your walk with God. And some people never continue in that confession. Listen, this last year, Karen and I have walked with close friends who had a miscarriage. And obviously, when you go through something like that, there's incredible heartache and just a woundedness and healing that needed to be done. And then they found out they got pregnant again. And yet, throughout this pregnancy, there's been many scares of losing this baby too. And each time we're battling in prayer, right? That warrior spirit, we're going to battle and we're praying and we've seen God's hand move and protect over and over again. But I'll tell you this, each time this husband and this wife, they have been confessing and declaring their trust in God no matter what. Each time, God, we trust you. God, we trust you. It didn't eliminate the hurt. They trusted God when they had the miscarriage. It didn't eliminate the hurt, but God, we trust you no matter what. They're a month ago in having this baby, and all of a sudden this week, they found out that she needed to go in and have an emergency C-section because there's fluid that was building up in the baby's head. And so they deliver the baby. The baby is there and healthy, looking good. And they spent about a day with the baby, and all of a sudden they come in and took the baby to the NICU unit because they're concerned that the fluid isn't draining. And so here we are continuing to pray for God's healing, for God's protection. And the reason every time we're praying is this, we're declaring, God, we trust you. God, you are our God who saves. And throughout this whole ordeal, we have to keep making this declaration. God, we trust you. Listen, I don't know where you're at today, but I do know that there are many of us who are going through something big right now. And it's time for you to declare, Jesus, you're Lord. You're Lord of this. My life is surrendered to you, and it's in your hands. What I'm going through, I surrender to you. Because no matter what, the answer of who Jesus is Jesus, you're the Messiah, you're the Son of God, you're the one who saves. And I'm going to make that confession over and over and over again because I trust you no matter what happens. And I just think God is leading us, many of us today, to make that declaration in this time as we get ready to have an altar time. We're going to have communion, and then we're going to spend some time in prayer at the altar. I want to just end with this, though. Maybe you need to declare for the first time, Jesus, you're the one who saves me. Maybe you've never surrendered your life to God and let him be your Savior. The Bible says this, Romans 10:9, if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart Jesus is Lord and God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Simple. But it takes your confession and placing your trust in God that allows God to save you. But it's the greatest thing every one of us needs.